Okay, I think we are recording. So everybody see the record lights up?
Yes.
Yeah, it looks good. Okay. This is the identity open meeting. We're facing the challenges of decentralizing identity and self-sovereign identity, and building it for our communities and the future systems, world computers of Holochain, RChain, and those that emerge. So we talked a little bit about the Seattle Gov Forum and employing privacy by default, privacy by design, capabilities-based security. We had other items on here. Do we want to talk about the does anybody have any comment on these issues?
I have, this is Rao, I have one thought which I think current systems or current security doesn't properly capture is that of guardianship, whether it is children or old persons. Like for my mom, I do things, whether it's her banking or anything else that's related. She doesn't touch the computer, but I go in and act as her. Essentially, and same for children probably in some cases. So the concept of guardianship, even though it exists widely in the society, has not actually been captured properly in the identity space, digital identity space. I'm not sure how, well, it's not even UMA delegation. Maybe it is. I mean, maybe that's a way of implementing guardianship. But I thought that's a thing we need to probably address at some point. How does guardianship work? Yeah, that's all I wanted to say on that.
Okay, please feel free to write in the notes document. And I think we missed recording the welcome Amika. Why don't you say hello to everyone, and maybe what you're hoping to do with this group.
Okay, hello again to everybody. So with this group, like I said earlier, I'm into the security and privacy space from the governance point of view, where I look at best practice policies, and just ensuring that there's a best fit in terms of context. So with this group, I'm looking to see how we can shape privacy even into our identity, and also looking to see how we can compare what we do with what's out there and how we can improve on it. Because in my opinion, there's no point reinventing the wheel if it's out there. So that's exactly what I'm looking to do, looking to proofread and just ensure that from a governance, and then if there is some compliance with a standard, we're actually taking into it and not just doing a checkbox kind of thing, but also adding value and adding a spirit behind, what drives us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. We had, we're still welcome for comments on the privacy governance. You had mentioned the GDPR. So if there's any comments on this, please feel free to pipe up. And also we have RChain cooperation, Holochain IDP identity. Maybe I should say, slash RChain, because those are both back ends would be are targeted. There's the work with hybrid auth, which supports OAuth to many different systems, so that you can get control of your LinkedIn account with the LinkedIn APIs and such by bringing your LinkedIn identity or your GitHub identity or whatever. You can make yourself enable people to affect these external identities that they necessarily will have many of. And hybrid auth gives us a good start as a framework that allows us to access all of these different providers and get tokens, so that the user can use their permission or give their permission to someone else. Their user agent or their robots can act on their behalf according to their rules, with all these external identity sources, whatever. But the first thing, this is really giving us a single sign-on. You have an identity that goes with you from Discord to GitHub to Mattermost. Okay, so that maybe you type a command into Mattermost, and one of the things it does is update a Google spreadsheet and enter an issue on GitHub. And by bringing these identities together, we can have that have that process automated for you. When really enabling people in the bot ecosystem. And the DID directory, W3C verifiable claim standards, this consideration of keybase.io proofs as one of the identities we can bring. The Dig ID dashboard, how we interact with these APIs on these other systems. Working out loud, producing work products, social learning, maintaining, curating our shared memory, and our structure in the social ledger. I guess it was outstanding video production issue. We have a lot of good videos in the can from this meeting. That could be associated with our Know Yourself ebook effort, which...
I'm sorry, Jim, which meeting are you talking about?
This meeting, the open identity meeting.
All right, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, mostly, I think they're all in the Divi DAO YouTube channel, but we've had some good guests, and there's a lot of material we can mine on identity for the Know Yourself ebook, the movie. Let's put ebook movie.
What's ebook the movie?
That's,
it's series of conference these meetings. What is the movie?
Yeah, I mean, it's just an edited version of the archives.
Is the link to it somewhere in the document, or where is it at? And also, can you paste the agenda link?
Okay. The most of this in the log here is about the ebook and links, right? And so the log should have what you want. Now, I guess the if we click on one of the videos,
you're not sharing your screen.
Oh. No, I don't see a video here anyway. I don't know why.
Also, while you're looking for the Jim, one of the things I thought would be very helpful for me anyways is Leah had spent a lot of time researching, I guess, both the crypto space and specifically the ID space. I was wondering, Leah, would you be amenable to maybe do a quick brain dump or a presentation? I mean, it doesn't have to be pretty or I don't particularly, I'm not trying to add work to you, but more just say, okay, here's what all I have gone through. And if it's just a matter of you having that log from previous meetings with you that you can just talk to from there, whether or not there's a new presentation. I was wondering, whatever works for you, would you be interested in something like that, or? Leah, did you hear me? You're muted if you're speaking.
Yeah, sorry, I was having trouble unmuting myself. Yeah, no, I can definitely do that. Why don't I do that? I plan to do that next week. We can sort of start off with that. Hopefully this week we're going to start off with the taxonomy stuff.
Yeah, I mean, and it doesn't have to be a 1 hour thing. If you have 2-3 hours that you need to do a brain dump, I'm happy to sit through all of that, and or if taking notes or whatever is necessary, I'll do that also. But just we can work offline, or you can ping me to say, I'm willing to do that, but I need you to do this. I'll be happy to do that. Whatever works. Both
Okay,
on the crypto space and the identity space, whatever you had been investigating.
Yeah, and I think Amaka would definitely want to be there, right? Yeah. Okay, yeah, we'll figure something out. But so Amaka, if like this time next week, if we wanted to have like a long work session for maybe 2 or 3 hours, would you be able to do that?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, and Rao, so you're good with that too?
Yeah, Jim, next weekend is not your, that's not your Seattle trip, right? That's 10th of February.
You're on mute, Jim.
'10th or 17th. I mean, 10th, I may actually have a little bit of an issue. I'm not 100% sure right now, but I'll let you know either way.
Saturdays or Wednesdays work for me. Yeah, Leah, in case just.
Okay.
John, what's your availability?
Who?
John.
He's on mute.
I'm sorry, Raul. Yes, 3 to 5 is what I budgeted for this. But if it's a special, I wouldn't want to miss Leah's presentation, so count me in, definitely.
Okay, so I will confirm whether next week or the following week works better for me, Leah, on that. But either way, whatever help you need to get ready for that or something, just let me know before that.
Okay. Yeah, but if it's not next week, then it should be the week after. It should be 2 more weeks because Jim and Amaka are going to be at the governance conference.
Correct.
Yeah. Raul,
Okay.
you're coming, right, for the governance stuff?
Well, that was the plan. I haven't booked my tickets yet,
Oh,
so
okay.
I'm going to
Okay.
do that today and see how that works out. But
Okay, you mentioned. Yeah, cool.
Okay, yeah. Let's. I'll try to make it for the next week, but I'll definitely let you know sooner than later on that.
Okay.
Did you send the email requesting travel reimbursement?
That's what I just did, Jim. Haven't heard back yet, but
Okay.
we'll see. The other question I have is, does anybody have significant experience or at least research, I guess, done in GDPR? Amaka, you mentioned privacy. Are you familiar with GDPR, or did you do much in that space? Or John, since you're in UK?
Yeah, I've been looking at the GDPR, compliance and the articles. Yeah, but I'm happy to talk if John has, in the UK, everybody talks GDPR, so.
GDPR is a thorn in everybody's side. Nobody's really, I'll stick my neck on the line and say nobody's really prepared for it. It's due to go live in 25th of May. But I'm looking at it more from a recruitment perspective and how that's moving around and project managers, etc. I think the expert in the room today is Amaka. So, from our perspective, definitely.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Amaka.
Oh, I was just going to say, John is actually right. There's a lot of nuances. There's a lot of uncertainties, gray area in the GDPR space. But it's something that I've been looking at, and the interpretation is still very much subjective, even though we have a lot of guidelines out there, a lot of recitals trying to explain the article. But yes, it's ongoing, yeah. So
Okay.
I think I've done a bunch of work in that
So
space.
maybe you can do a presentation on GDPR for an hour or two or whatever it takes. In terms of the tools that are there for compliance and what has been done and so on and so forth. Because if we're crafting solutions, we want to know what is out there that we could bake into the solutions to be able to enable that for whoever is going to use our tools or frameworks. So that would be very helpful if you're able to do that at some point. Now, but what is John and Amaka and anybody else in the group, what is your assessment of, I mean, obviously this is not as big a problem as Y2K or anything like that, even within Europe, but how much of an issue is this for organizations?
Well, it's carrot and stick, and the stick is very large. It depends on who you speak to. Some people think that companies will try and ignore it as long as possible. And whether big tech will comply as well. even with Brexit, whatever you want, however you want to interpret that, it's not going to disappear. It's going to become law. So it's Europe and the UK, and it's going to affect everybody. Also, the way you look at it, you could look at it as being, I just said, a thorn in everybody's side. If you're running a business, it's a pain in the backside. But I think from our perspective, and in fact, I'm reiterating what Amaka said earlier, it's probably a good thing once it's balanced out, the rough edges are taken off. And I would agree with you, Raoul, that perhaps once we've got the taxonomy out of the way, so we have I think that we should agree an ordering of this. So we look at the technical stuff, stuff that could be reused, or specifications that are either in progress or well established, and then step back and then see how policy such as GDPR would apply to this. And there could be a big mismatch there. It could be that some of these, let me just pick one out, the UPort, for example. Let's just use this for argument's sake. UPort, GDPR, there may be a big compliance problem there. So I think what we could do is look at technology first and then law, compliance, maybe second. That's just an idea. I think I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but I'm quite keen to start on the taxonomy, and I think maybe other people in the room are too.
Sounds good. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Amaka.
The way that I see GDPR and every other kind of standard or regulation that I've worked with is things change over time, right? So the basic thing, like John, if I want to pick back on that, is let's look at the spirit behind GDPR. What is GDPR aiming to achieve beyond what's in the articles? Because things can change. We can have a new version tomorrow, because when someone or legislation look into that space, they probably will figure out this doesn't work the way we expect it to. So the bottom line is, as long as we understand what's the spirit behind GDPR, which can be gotten, I think, in Article 1 that talks about, to safeguard humans. We know that people can put in their identity and wake up tomorrow and say, hey, I want to withdraw my identity from that space, and we have a way to work around it. That's the kind of thing we should start looking at, right? So, hey, I want to alter my identity. Can an entity do that? If that's correct, that's fine. I want to take it back. I want a right to be forgotten. I've been in this number of space. Can I withdraw all that identity? And then we also have to look internally to say, in this model framework, at what point are we going to get to and say, hey, if these conditions are met, you cannot withdraw your identity just for public purpose or something like that. Then we start having the conversation around the spirit of the law rather than just what it's written. And that will give us, a whole lot faster pace to achieve what we want to achieve, rather than using GDPR as a roadblock, but we just use it as an enabler.
I think that's a really good. Sorry, Jim.
The spirit is, as you say, is important, and I think it has to do with ownership of your identity and the whole ownership segment. It's the identity ebook has a know yourself and own yourself component, and owning yourself, a self-sovereign identity, is exactly what we're doing in this group. Okay, we're addressing the problem directly in terms of giving people sovereignty over their identity and beyond identity, their personal information and work product. Okay, but we work in the context, in the social ledger of the activity within a team, within a domain, within an organization, and in our, we share ownership of identity and reputation within the circles that we're participating in. and we're deciding how we expose information from the activity to the team, to the domain and organization, and the interconnections between organizations. And we all have many contexts, and we have a different persona in each context. And managing those is the trick. How do we make that simple? How do we make it easy? And how do we take the burden away from the providers and the services and the vendors, and delegate that to the individual in a way that's safe. And that comes down to how we collaborate on our security and privacy, in our circles, whatever, and the webs of trust that we build. That connect us ultimately to everybody in the world. From the bottom up, building identity rather than from the top down. Central systems are corruptible, they can have cataclysmic failures, there's all kinds of issues with any kind of global identity, but we can achieve a identity that's relative to our webs of trust, that is trustworthy. I think, and it's a long evolutionary process. I think what, from my experience, is what the approach that most people are taking to the problems are stopgap efforts. Okay, they're not really addressing ownership of information. And I think that our focus needs to be on ownership of identity, and then we will meet GDPR. And because we're making the rules with user-managed authentications, which is the standard, and because our services are discovered by decentralized identifiers, we control what services are used.
That's a very good overview of everything that we're trying to do, Jim. John was trying to respond to Amaka also, so let him do that while you take a breath. I mean, did you want to have one other thing that you want to say and close?
It is, but it might be a bit incendiary, so bear with me when I say this, but I totally agree with what Amaka and Jim have just said there. It's more, let's look at the spirit of GDPR. For two reasons. One, it's not going to go away.
Mm-hmm.
And two, it's work in progress. There's going to be a huge amount of unintended consequences of this, which are not always going to be good. They're going to be bad as well. Now, what I find interesting is the more you think about this is how much, when GDPR is actually implemented, and it could be 5 years time frame on this, but say, let's, for argument's sake, it becomes implemented and it works quite well and people can claim back their data, give me my psychometric test back, should not be storing that, I want you to destroy it. How much then does that diminish the actual drive or the desire for self-sovereign? If every company complies with GDPR, and as far as I'm concerned, it's all good. It empowers the user and gives you back, essentially what self-sovereign is trying to fix. GDPR is going down the same road. So if we understand that, it could, it's changing the goalposts, I think, and we could be piling up technical debt on that we don't actually need to solve. So I've completely reversed my original suggestion of let's look at the technology first. I think Amika's onto something. Let's look at what's coming down the line, and which may mitigate a lot of this stuff. I know Jim may totally disagree with that, but I think it's something that I might try and take on board, is to think, well, I hope that makes sense to everybody.
It makes perfect sense. And yeah, I agree that this whole thing about the downside of being able to erase information and the effects that that can have with respect to bad actors, whatever, is a problem. And that's what I'm talking about is within activities that people are involved in, you lose some self-sovereignty. And that is not well defined, but we write a program together, and then all of a sudden you say, well, you can't use my part of it. Okay. That's sort of a breach of contract. And I think, social contracts, which is the basic concept in RChain, is a way that can mediate such situations. And that user-managed authorizations can be contracted. And, so this whole smart contract thing and peer-to-peer contracting, and then within teams and up, is something that we will be doing. And, it's user-driven. We create and share our contracts, which essentially is our terms of the privacy terms that we and conditions that we set ourselves, rather than them being set by the service provider or the government. We set the terms and permissions, and but not only individually, in our groups. And we still, it becomes decentralized, but we still have this holonic structure of that does purposeful transparency. As the right to be forgotten comes in conflict with transparency.
Well, I mean, just like with GDPR, I think we still need to look into what problems might crop up in that space of social contracting. And I know Gurinder was telling me about this episode of Black Mirror about technology. There's one called Reputation, apparently. I haven't watched it yet on Netflix. So we really need to think about everything, whatever, even the most idealistic thing that might seem very exciting to us will still have downside or negative consequences. And we need to examine those and look at how that works. But going back to this GDPR, Amaka, would you be kind enough to add some of the best links of GDPR information, different aspects of it, into this document that Jim had put in there later on when you get a chance, so that we can maybe, when you are ready to speak to it, if we had the time, we would have reviewed some of that stuff. I mean, especially the guys in Europe may be more aware of what's going on there. I'm kind of completely ignorant of it at this point in time.
Okay, I'll do that. And I think the first source that I will just share is where the actual verbiage is really written, because I always like people to read from the source and not just people's interpretation of it. Because when you look at people's interpretation of it, somebody might be driving with, something in mind or to sell a product. So his interpretations cloud what's originally written. So I probably would just share the original stuff, and then from there we can start sharing links that would
Right.
help.
I mean, anything at all, like others' commentaries or criticism or tools and technology that you think are kind of like emulating or the best in class, any of that, whatever you were able to put in there would give us a little bit of a head start.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
I added a link to the GDPR homepage. But yeah, if anything you thought was a useful source, beyond that, feel free to add that to the notes. And somebody for contributing to the notes, that would be good if, since I'm very bad at taking notes during these meetings. I'd appreciate if add something. But I guess we can move on to another agenda item or topic.
Well, I have just one other question. So, John, with the Brexit, is GDPR still applicable in UK or not anymore?
The UK were part of the drafting of the legislation. It's not, but it will go on the legislature. It's here for good. It's not. It's a global thing. This. I mean, you're asking me. I'm not the right person. There's somebody else in the room who's an expert here.
I know. I guess I mentioned this only because you're physically sitting over there. But
it's. I would actually, just to reiterate, it is headless chickens. Does that make any sense?
Right.
I think Rao is asking if Great Britain is subject to GDPR.
Correct. Like companies in UK, are they subject to this GDPR after the Brexit or not? It was my question.
Oh, sorry. So it comes into force on the 25th of May, pretty soon, a few weeks away. And yes, it's basically, for me, I have to register with the ICO, Information Commission's office.
Yeah.
So it kind of replaces all that. So yes.
Sorry, John, why do you need to register? I'm sorry.
When you're dealing with records of third-party customer records.
So your customers are you providing services online, or are you providing in-person, like recruiting?
Well, we're involved with recruitment, although we're not a recruitment agency. But anybody that's storing customer, personal records is covered by the legislation. And when it comes into law in May, it applies to everybody, and it will. And to answer Raoul's question, as far as I know, and I've heard this politicians saying this, Brexit won't have anything to do with it. It's here for good.
So I guess I'm just curious. I haven't been following Brexit in detail. So all the EU laws, quote unquote, will they be on the books of UK after the Brexit, or the UK will re-vote? Go back to legislature and choose and pick and choose which one of those will they go with.
They've called it the at the end of the day, Brexit is a tedious pain in the backside, and it's just a big soap opera. But it's called the Great Repeal Act. So essentially, all the laws that are currently in place move from European jurisdiction to UK law. So yes, it's just one big forklift truck of laws. They're trying to enact these Henry VIII laws, which allows the incumbent government to override some things without any agreement in Parliament. But you know, it's an internal thing. It's not going to affect anybody else. And once that happens, and in fact, I'm no shame in this. I actually voted for Brexit. I think Europe is broken and it needs a rethink. And I thought this would trigger it. At the moment, it doesn't look that way, but we don't know what's going to happen in future. You know, at the end of the day, Europe isn't in a good position anyway. But that's a bit of a diversion. But once we've split the laws, or this Great Repeal Act is finished, we still need to be able to comply with European regulations. So if we want to sell them jars of marmalade, they have to conform to the standards of glass and recyclability and preservatives. So it's so if that's the case for things like goods and trade, well, GDPR is central to that. You know, that's why I hope that makes sense. You can't really take it away. And again, it's going to have to affect the Middle East, the United States, you know, when they trade with Europe. So Europe is the biggest trading bloc. So it kind of affects everybody.
Right. Even the US companies that are selling services or provide access to European entities, European citizens, they're all subject to it.
Sorry to interrupt. I might be able to find something online later if anybody's interested, but there are, I mean, Amica may be able to provide a bit better anecdotal evidence of this, but there are question marks over whether, this is where I get nervous when we're recording these things, but let me just say this hypothetically, that Google may choose not to comply with this, or they may, you know, drag their heels and then it's kind of what happens next. They're the kind of big, and Facebook as well. It's, will they actually toe the line? Because the law, the GDPR is so pervasive. I hope, yes. So maybe
I think it's probably a discussion for another conference. But in terms of the GDPR, it's going to happen regardless of Brexit is the final notice there. I noticed Ed joined us. Welcome, Ed.
Hey, Jim. Hey, everyone. It's been a while since I've been on. Probably 2 months, maybe even a month and a half anyway. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm one of the founders of RChain and very active at RChain Holding. I announced on the Wednesday RChain community hangout that on the identity front, we're working with a couple of different identity companies to form a working group with the goal of either creating or identifying, adopting standards for interoperability on self-sovereign public blockchains. So that may, you know, there's a couple of different levels of that interoperability. One is sort of at the data format or on the wire kind of thing, such as the DID standard and maybe what the format of a claim may look like. And there's some standards in these areas. And then the next level down is like at the API level. And then ultimately what I want to get to are smart contracts on RChain that will be part of a set of protocols that can be agreed upon across many vendors, so that the vendors can offer sort of true portability amongst them for the sharing of claims, for attestations, and for revocation of those. So we've identified at least 3 companies that want to work on this, and we're preparing to formalize that and announce that and stuff. So yeah, I noticed a number of new faces here that I don't know yet. So I'm delighted that this group has grown since I tuned in last. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hi.
Ed, I'm really excited that you are here. I was in that Wednesday meeting when you announced. Jim and I were both there.
Great.
So I have a couple of questions. One is maybe could you speak to is Holdings only doing activity in the ID space, or Ventures also doing something in the ID space? And also, I'm not sure who heads the Ventures effort, and how do we get more tied into? In fact, Jim and I had this conversation that we should follow up with you and Lawrence so that our effort is not kind of in its own island, but is integrated with everything else that you're doing.
Oh yeah. I just realized my camera was facing a strange location. I apologize. I thought it was on my face. That's better.
It's only showing a plant, so that's not that bad.
Yeah, that was my cross trainer that I don't use too often, but it serves as a great holder of jackets. Yeah. So, and well, there's a third, the third organization, of course, the cooperative itself, and Greg Meredith announced the previous week that Imogen Heap and her Mycelia project will have an ID or a passport project that he's been talking with her about. So there's this other identity effort too. So I'm in the process of forming this essentially a mission or a charter statement. I'm probably going to be fairly selective to organizations that are vendors that spend a lot of time in this space, that are dedicated to, these different precepts. And I haven't even, listed them out yet, but essentially open source, public, self-sovereign identity. And that, are kind of spending a lot of time in there and want to sort of get the core of this working well, listing out the standards, listing out the objectives that we want to accomplish. And then we'll open it up to more over time. There may be some of you that qualify in that that subset, but I just don't happen to know your backgrounds, everyone. So in terms, so we can certainly talk, and then in terms of Ventures, they're still getting started. They really haven't announced yet. I believe, look forward to announcements from them in the around the time of the governance meeting. Greg Heiss is the lead of that organization, and I don't know really if they're going to have anything specifically on identity going on in terms of their investments, but as you all know, self-sovereign identity and identity more broadly is so essential to get right on the blockchain. I would, so everyone should care about it, and I would, and so they, for many of these solutions to succeed that are on top of identity, like anything with financial transactions over a certain small amount of money, right, needs KYC and AML and so forth, as just an obvious statement. But it's actually much more pervasive than just that, right? If you want to prove provenance of a digital thing that you put on the blockchain, provenance around is about identity and around signing that content, right, and so forth. So we are going to have to talk more, which is why I'm joining to tune back in and get up to speed about what's going on.
Now, I know you're working with Free ID. Who else are you working with? I think there are 2 more companies that you're working with right now. Right?
Well, Who did you mention a second ago?
Free ID. At least I heard it mentioned by somebody in the group.
Now, free ID is the is BYOID project.
Oh, okay.
It's an open ID.
Yeah, there's a couple. I will say that our moderator for this forum that we're going to create is Chris Boscolo, who's the CEO of Life ID.
Life
ID.
Okay.
And they're a very capable but small company in the Seattle area. And so he and I are working on the charter right now. I've talked to 3 or 4 other about getting engaged in it, and just not prepared to mention their names yet until we sort of work out. I don't want to surprise anybody on teams is mostly what it's about. And you know, a lot of times there's companies that work together and somebody leaks out and says we have a partnership, and then everyone gets all frustrated. What does that mean? What does that mean? And I don't want to surprise anybody by pre-announcing these things. But you know, we are taking it on for RChain Holdings quite seriously, that we really need to get solutions around, you know, key management, including key recovery is a really tricky one. And then that's the basis for both identity and wallets. And so we want to make sure we get those features out and so forth. So yeah, that's since our board, we appointed Lawrence as CEO, that frees up a lot of my time to focus on these things and some other early application areas we need to get going.
Would somebody like Holochain be in your list of people that you want to collaborate with or not? Or
I've met the guy from Holochain at the Internet Identity Workshop back in August, I think it was, or and he's a great guy. I haven't studied it and don't know it deeply beyond that, and so I'm open to those discussions. I don't know offhand to say yes or no.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I was thinking is to the extent that the standards that you are trying to develop are supposed to be cross blockchain, what blockchains or what blockchain people should be involved in that conversation is kind of what I'm wondering.
Yeah, so there's these different levels of interchange, but like the Decentralized Identity Foundation, the W3C has some relevant standards. There's IETF-like processes that we can engage in, and there's some ISO standards that are relevant here. So I think some of this, at least from my perspective, involves some education about what's out there already. And I've got notes about that. I learned a lot at this Internet Identity Workshop. Jim was there too, that's right. Hey, and I've talked to a couple people on the Sovereign team. Drummond Reed happens to be out here in Seattle as well. We've met several times with him. He's a wealth of knowledge, and I have a lot of respect for Sovereign in their understanding of the space. They've chosen this public permissioned blockchain approach, which is interesting. You know, with I think that the premise is you have to trust someone, and the way to boot up this system is by putting these trust anchors in place. So anyway, I think we have to continue educating ourselves and get sort of this base level understanding across what's this working group core team, and then create a framework of sort of a sequence of standards from, you know, data interchange formats to API level, to blockchain protocols in a generic sense, to blockchain protocols specific to RChain, and then the smart contracts and Rolang. So whether it's going to proceed as linearly as I described it, I don't know, but that's what I'm thinking right now. So we have a lot of work to do, and part of that is education of people like me.
Yeah, I think there's the new digital rights management standard that you probably want to look into.
Very good.
I was digging into that.
ODRL, it's called ODRL. It's a W3C standard.
Oh, excellent.
I guess to your point, two things. One is obviously existing standards from ISO, IETF, W3C, IAW, wherever else, to bring them into a framework that says, okay, here is what we've got that we're comfortable using, and they play well together.
Right.
Is one of the things. And then the other thing is to move the RChain initiative itself forward, so that it's ready on the identity aspects, at least version 01 identity or version 01 identity or whatever it is.
Exactly.
So how do we work that both, because the rest of it in terms of developing standards with a group of parties, whether they're ID providers or other blockchains or whatever, might take a while. And now there's also that standard for multi-factor integration. The name is slipping me right now, but it came out in the last 5 years or so, 3 to 5 years. FIDO, yeah, FIDO.
Right.
So, I mean, there is obviously a whole bunch of stuff right now that we could say, yes, this, and this, plug and play. And we need to define the requirements from an RChain perspective to say, version 001, here is what we need done, and next, here are the next few versions of it. How do we do that? I mean, is this the group to do that, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree we need to do that, and especially the requirements on the platform itself. So, for example, I believe FIDO and an iPhone use a different elliptic curve set of parameters than the Ethereum address, a key pair. And that's a problem from an adoption standpoint. So if we can get assurance that, for example, iPhone elliptic curve can be respected, can be handled on RChain out of the box, that would greatly increase the ability to get these identity products out there using RChain. In addition, we want the elliptic curve from Ethereum also to be used, because that's important from, in my opinion, the smooth transition from the rock to the rev, as well as onboarding Ethereum products and developers and so forth. So this is an example of a requirement on the platform. So, either myself or Chris Boscolo will certainly try to get onto these calls more regularly now. Has Chris been on these calls previously?
You're muted, Jim.
Yeah, no, Chris. I don't believe Chris has been here.
Okay, I'll try to arrange for him to be on next week's call and connect.
We can always arrange, special calls.
Yeah.
We actually have a number of meetings on identity. This is the open meeting. We've had meetings with Holochain. They have a DPKI infrastructure for the Holochain pre-alpha, which allows supports the recovery of keys, and we're looking at working to develop the decentralized identifier directory and service discovery. And we need to consider how we discover services down the hierarchy, from the RChain services and the Holochain services and the sovereign services, and the self-sovereign IDs that people will have across the ecosystem, employing the standards. And in terms of the APIs, the UMA 2.0 is a key thing that we're implementing in the social ledger as a way of making identity self-sovereign. The ERC 725 and 735 define that an interface for self-sovereign identity on Ethereum, and it's also a very good basic interface to use for our other APIs. And I think
cool. Was that driven by the Uport team, the 735?
No, it isn't. Okay, and it's independent of Uport to some extent, and just exactly how they're going to integrate is a question that hasn't really been answered. But Uport has not yet said we will support ERC 725. In a sense, I'm not sure that they need to. I think they both, there's a need for an interface like the ERC20 token.
Yeah.
And, to some extent, it allows, discovery of services in a different way, but it may be complementary.
Right. There's more than one way to skin a cat, or whatever the expression is. So there may be. So I think this kind of touches on the point that there'll be some prioritization of this working group of which things need to be solved first, and so the use cases that drive the focus and so forth would be interesting. I think also RChain will result in a new set of de facto standards around some of this because the capabilities are different. So while we want to use everything that is sort of the leading adopted standards in the space, there may be some things that just not everyone can agree to. And in terms of the vendors that RChain Holdings would work with, we would try to get them to collaborate and adopt something, even if it's not yet standardized, but it's practical. So
but I mean, even if that is the case, that we will have to create some new standards. The problem of legacy is not going to go away.
Absolutely.
So we need to somehow translate whatever we're doing or interlink whatever we're doing with what exists at some level. But a group of us are certainly very anxious to hear your and others to help capture the RChain requirements aggressively, kind of as a sub-project or whatever, or a subgroup, to do that on a regular basis so that we can actually go ahead and implement some of those initial versions relative to RChain pipeline and timelines.
When you're saying the RChain standards or RChain requirements, you're referring to on the platform itself or on a layer above the platform?
On the identity requirements on RChain. Right.
Okay, but yeah, just to be clear, that could still answer my question in either way. So and I think it's to some extent this will not necessarily happen all at once, but I would appreciate all of your help in describing the requirements, or I don't happen to know what elliptic curve FIDO uses and the details of what the iPhone uses. I'm talking about what's in the trusted execution environment on the iPhone, the secure enclave. There's some signing capability. We want that to work on RChain on the platform. So the math libraries and so forth we would need to have some kind of address scheme or namespace scheme where, let's say, iPhone public-private keys work in one namespace and Ethereum works in another one, and why not Bitcoin in a third one? Because we really want to, that third one's not so critical, but that would be nice, right? Then we could get onboarding much easier without requiring people change their addresses and their key management necessarily. and then we have more of a chance for broad adoption. So definitely to get those communicated. And another one that comes up, and this is something I need to actually research, maybe one of you know, is the Ethereum roadmap. I don't think it's in the Byzantium release, but correct me if I'm wrong, but is planned for the Metropolis release, is this notion of account abstraction, where a client can sign a transaction without paying ETH, as long as that contract, you know, essentially holds some ETH in escrow to pay the rest of the transaction gas fee. So this account abstraction requirement is a really important one for me, because I think it would accelerate a lot of solutions, but I need to study it and figure out what's really there. Do any of you happen to know more about account abstraction?
Just that it lowers the bar for people. It provides a means of you paying for your customers' use of Ethereum, and it's hard to get people to pay to be a customer.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I need to do. It's on my list to read up and learn about it. But it's I think, you know, the same reasons why it came into the roadmap of Ethereum is because it would solve a lot of problems. So these kinds of requirements on the platform itself, you know, to get them clearly written up with the motivation, ultimately, you know, in the form of it's either a user story or an epic that can be put into Jira to track as a backlog item, you know, so it's really, you know, crisp enough that it describes why, what the motive. And then once that's ready, then we can have the conversation with Meta, Nash, Greg, to say, can you, co-op platform team, commit to putting this in the Mercury release or not, or can we horse trade something else out because this is really important? So that's it. Or in other words, let me give you another example. If it would delay Mercury by 1 week, is it worth it? You know, that kind of discussion.
Well, we can certainly deliver something. Okay, this is a very complex problem, and the standards are the tip of the iceberg, really. I mean, they're all extensible, and they need to be extended because they only define the basic necessary capabilities.
Yeah, I'm talking specifically about these 3 features I mentioned: the elliptic curve of FIDO, of iPhone, and account abstraction.
Okay, now the service discovery comes free. You can discover the service through the BYOID directory and discover which one of these services the person uses.
Right, but these services are not, they're not at the platform level. They're not in Mercury. They're, if I understand correctly, these are a layer on top of the RChain platform. Is that how you understand it, Jim?
I understand it as, you know, a self-sovereign identity that's external. It's the iPhone or it's somewhere else that you know, we discover that they're using those services, and then the actual implementation of that service, yes, could be outside the RChain platform. Ideally, it wouldn't need to be.
Right. So, like if I understand correctly, a DID resolver that resolves the DID to an endpoint that you can do more with. That's actually not in the RChain platform or the plans for the RChain platform, but would be a layer on top. And that layer on top is something, I don't know if, you know, it is something that I would like this working group around holdings or the people that the companies we invest in to deliver, because it needs to be there. I just don't think the platform has ever signed up for that in the particulars.
I see. So there's a, if we're going to execute a service outside of the RChain platform, that's like an oracle, right? That, from the RChain platform point of view. Now, if we discover the service is on RChain, we don't ever have to leave RChain to run the service. But if it's external, we need to call it an oracle. Okay, and there has to be a way to do oracles. We can't have a system that doesn't have that capability.
Correct.
And initially, most of the services won't be on RChain. They'll mostly be oracles because they're existing legacy services.
Right. So if
gradually they'll come onto RChain.
Yeah. So if if RChain implements the platform implements a kind of registry lookup where you could look up a DID and find its endpoint, and then the endpoint you can find the URL in the real world. There's still no oracle involved in there. It's just all data pointers. But then you would get to some hosted website that would do more or whatever. But yeah, all this kind of architecture needs to be fleshed out. And
on HTTP GET, that's off RChain, right?
Jim, what you're mentioning sounds like the broker stuff I mentioned earlier on. So it's like having like an identity broker, and then we don't really have to really define it, and everything existing, we just have to look for common denomination and see how we can translate it and then use that identity rather than recreate and also reduce the usefulness of existing identities that is out there in terms of legacy. So we just need that translation or a broker feed. We may really sit on top of RChain, but I would say that there should be a long roadmap to be able to put that in the RChain platform. So RChain can own like an identity repository that can be used to translate identity and also used in multiple platforms. Because if we start with looking at it from a brokerage standpoint, it can really ramp up adoption.
Yeah, I think I see that, the decentralized identity service discovery as a broker. In other words, you look up the identifier that is a persona, and it has services listed there, and they could be services on the RChain chain, or they could be RESTful services, or like OAuth or whatever that are on the web or on Holochain. Okay, so you have some mechanism to execute it, and Ed, I'm suggesting that if the services is an HTTP, that's not just data, that's the service endpoint that you use for the services discovered.
Yep, I got it. And my point is that I believe that's on top of the RChain platform. In other words, what release the co-op will release and bless and call Mercury, that this is something beyond that, at least in the first version. And this is the kind of discussion we need to have. So I think what would be helpful is to get, a diagram of, it's really high level, of what's in the RChain platform and what's not. And so what's not has to be above it, what all of us and others believe that needs to be standard, for example, just to resolve DIDs to an endpoint, assuming everyone's on board with that, right? So that's I believe, some layer above it, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. But these are kind of negotiations of what the platform will deliver and what will be essentially, although people don't like this characterization, a platform on top of the platform, or an architecture layer that's on top of the RChain core.
Yeah, like on Holochain, we're looking to build the DID directory, which is, essentially a key value store, more network database structure, whatever. But the actual decentralized database is outside of Holochain. They only have to maintain the DIDs that are on Holochain. And if I'm on there and I use a solid server for my authentication and whatever, that endpoint, it points to my identity provider. But yes, my identity provider is outside, but the service discovery, I have a person object, so to speak, a person agent on RChain or Holochain that uses this external service discovery. And in order to transition, I think we need to support that out of the box. Not everybody's going to, have their identity all on RChain initially. They're going to bring their own identity, and some services will gradually be provided by RChain itself, but not for everybody and not for every service. If you're going to control your thermostat with UMA, give your brother permission to access it, it's going to call external APIs to do that.
Yeah, I mean, basically, perhaps one perspective to take on what needs to be on the platform or close to the platform, just on top of the platform, is the adoption, right? I mean, what do we need for quick adoption of RChain? And we say, okay, here are the basic things we need to make that happen, because we don't want to complicate the development delivery process either. Nor do we want to put things into the platform that might change later on. I mean, we want to put a minimal layer into the platform.
Correct. Yeah. So yeah, by next Saturday, I should have more details on that question, at least getting a bulleted list as I write out this charter for that working group. I have like a lot of raw notes, and I guess the other thing too is there may be multiple identity solutions. What comes out of one set of innovators and product companies, what comes out of the Mycelia project that Greg and the co-op are working on, and what comes out of Holdings working group, and what comes out of this working group could be slightly different. That may not be ideal, but that may just be that may just be a reality, because it's hard to coordinate everything. I wanted to get in also the opinion that what the co-op itself really needs is identities for its membership. I mean, strong digital identities for its memberships, starting with what do you call it? Public key voting, or public and a voting mechanism for every member, because as the membership grows, we're going to need to vote on more issues. And I'm surprised that I haven't seen progress on that issue yet. Maybe that's been made and I just not plugged into it. So these use cases, and that would be early on my list, for the co-op itself, what does it need, right? And so I've heard mention of those use cases, but do we have, either in this document or the log earlier meetings, have a set of driving use cases?
Yeah, we have done some use cases. I think though that we need to start again. They're dated at this point.
Because that's going to depend on the user, right? What the co-op needs for its own management, what Holochain needs, is what Mattermost needs, what the social ledger project, they're going to be different priorities perhaps, and that's okay.
And
but
this was a UPort effort, which didn't get much participation from developers. We got to the point of making claims on it and designing the UPort identity for the RChain from a high level, and that contained the membership.
Oh, that's great to hear. I didn't know there was progress on that front. That's good.
Well,
so why did that lose momentum?
It was, I guess, due to lack of interest. So, you know, and I guess, you know, that's probably, since you mentioned that it's a priority, we should look at that. Now, with the advent of the 725, 735, our approach may be a little bit different than we originally envisioned, because that gives richer self-sovereignty, in my view, of the identity.
Yeah, but you know, the risk in all of these things, I'm speaking strictly from the co-op's perspective in this statement. You know, it has a problem to be solved, and it really affects the governance of the co-op itself. And so I'd like to see something expedient done in that. And, you know, here the co-op's been in existence for over a year, and this basic membership tracking and voting is still not solved. So, and for whatever reason, the community doesn't seem too concerned about it, which is surprising. Because it's okay when you have, you know, 100 members to do something quasi-manually, but when the membership of the co-op grows, if we as a membership are going to make any meaningful decisions, we've got to have a system for that, right?
Yeah. Well, you know, a lot of the effort has been on trying to bring the identities together from Discord and GitHub into a singular member identity that goes across the tools and provides a single sign-on.
That's also nice, but that's also good. That's also a very legitimate requirement. But getting voting mechanism to work is, to me, more important.
And you know, this is you know, verifiable claims, which, you know, I mean, you say an expedient solution. You know, I guess that means using the standards that exist today or applying them. And
yeah, so you could either use you know, Uport or MetaMask and the signing capabilities around that, and create a voting mechanism. In fact, Jake Gilbert created a proof of concept on GitHub based voting, and start using it. It's just and again, it doesn't solve all these problems. I give you that. So going back, it seems like the group, whether it's, you know, this group needs to prioritize the problems it wants to solve. And again, from the co-op perspective, I'd like to see voting solved.
Yeah, the big issue that we had there was with anonymity, and we did identify one solution that supported anonymity on Ethereum, and it was a question of, there were some drawbacks, some restrictions, and it was a question of whether we could apply that to the co-op or not. But definitely we'll revisit that.
Yeah, anonymity would be very good.
And that's the question, is can we go forward with something that's not anonymous on the blockchain, or do we have to do it off the blockchain? And then there's the off-blockchain solutions, which involve signed messages. They can use the Ethereum addresses, you know, keys. And then there's, you know, how do we evolve toward a KYC system that is proven? I mean, one of the issues that was on today is, should we support Keybase? Keybase, you know, proves a number of identity aspects, but it's fairly public. It doesn't hide any of them.
Yeah. So, I mean, one thing that could be done, since the governance conference is just a few weeks away, is you know, put out these requirements and get a sense of the room, which of these are essential. You know, is getting voting by members quote unquote fixed, or getting a little bit less gameable, even important, you know, because they're in Discord, you can do up or down voting, and maybe that's enough, right? Maybe we do have a mechanism, we're just not using it. And then for the next step is, you know, digital signature plus anonymity, the next set of requirements. And then get a budget for that from the co-op and move forward, you know.
Yeah, I guess one of the issues, I guess, that led, you know, sort of led into the fizzling of this was they have an identity on the member site, which can be used for voting. Okay, and it can be done off-chain, whatever. And now there's, you know, you know, there's a Discord identity now that identifies members. So do we need, I mean, is it considering the anonymity issues, et cetera, is it really a priority to have a decentralized solution at this point? And certainly if the co-op grows, having a decentralized solution would be ultimately necessary.
Yeah, I think whatever we're designing, we should assume there's at least 10,000 members or whatever at that kind of a level. And at least with the current number of members that are there, some of these things we can just probably even ask the whole membership, not just at the governance conference. We'll just do a quick Discord poll or something to say, look, here are the 3 options, 2 options, whatever, for your voting, and put some blurb explaining each of those, you know, pros and cons, and say what do you support. And at least then we have a legitimate basis for saying, yes, the membership has gone with this particular solution. I mean, this little group doesn't have to necessarily make the decision.
Right, and these even doing sort of experiments of votes could be interesting. Like, here's a little survey about how the co-op and the Pyrofex deal happened. You know, did you feel informed? You know, how could we have done better? Whatever that survey might look like, and that could be done or it'd have to be, I guess, multiple choice. Same thing with the ventures deal, and same thing with the organization of the governance conference. And so just to, even if they're non-binding votes, just to use the voting mechanism would be interesting. Like, you know, can we even achieve consensus? I'm sorry, what I meant was quorum on some of these opinions, or I think just the process of voting, as much of the mechanism is really important for the governance.
And I think that voting is probably less important than having good decision processes. And and I think voting may be part of making good decisions. It may not be the way to make the best decisions in itself, but
fair enough. I mean, we only
what I was suggesting was, for expedience, we use something like Lumio, which is a members only Lumio instance, which has some good new features for scheduling meetings and doing rank ordering and other things that it didn't have back in the day when we were using it with Scenario. But using Lumio, or if there's something better out there, use it. Just so that we have something rather than nothing. We just take the best of what's available and we employ it. For now, while we're developing this decentralized anonymous voting scheme.
Yeah, actually, on that note, I have two things I want to say. One is Jim's suggestion of using Lumio is something we should definitely check out, because they have done a whole bunch of work working out how to handle things in large groups of people. And they also happen to be a cooperative organization. And the second thing I wanted to mention is that if we do want to develop our own voting component, then I'm pretty sure Jay Gilbert will be happy to work on that. So we might then have a developer who wants to jump in on it. But the specification of it is what will be the challenge, actually.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'm glad you're on board to help us keep priorities in line here with the cooperative ed. And
well, I'm just reminding this group of that perspective. I'm not going to worry about it personally too much. I'm worried about building a healthy ecosystem of products and solutions, which is longer term than that. But I'm just saying that it's, as a co-op member, I think there's more of these decisions ahead. I mean, the only one we have absolutely planned is the election of directors at the end of this coming October, right? But there's an opportunity for more decisions of a voting nature between now and then. I don't know what they will be, but I'm sure there'll be some.
So you have a feeling or thought about using Lumio or an alternative?
I know very little about Lumio. You know, it's another system to use. I have so many accounts and so many things. So my gut reaction is I don't like it, but it's mostly out of ignorance.
You'd be happier with a plug-in or a voting bot on Discord?
Well, if it's for a short-term solution, I think that's the way to go. If it's a longer-term solution, then we might as well do something that's closer to the self-sovereign identity and voting. And there's apps already there that will do the kind of signing, including Uport and MetaMask are two that are available. They don't handle the anonymity, but they're available otherwise.
Right. Well, if we send the messages off chain, they're still provable.
Yeah.
And they are anonymous, sort of. I mean, they still would be collected by the collective. So they would be. There would be the potential of determining who voted for what. But yes, we'll definitely look into that. I'm leaning towards Lumio because it's not only voting; it provides a means for making reasonable decisions.
Well, we can experiment with both and see what the take-up is on one or the other, and or maybe Lumio gives more functionality than a MetaMask or what type of a solution. So,
well, that's the other thing is, I mean, we can use multiple tools. For example, you can have OAuth authentication into Lumio that utilizes a signed message from Ethereum, from MetaMask, whatever. I'm trying to do. But yeah, there's no question we can connect our tools. We don't have to necessarily develop anything from scratch or everything from scratch. Just what parts of it would enhance it. I mean, obviously, Lumio is still centralized. But,
just to clarify something, in a voting system, are we interested in who voted for what, or just getting the aggregate of the votes that we get per section?
Well, you know, in some cases you want to know, and in other cases you want it to be anonymous. So it's, and that's a good point, because Lumio, I don't think does anonymous voting, which would be a showstopper.
Yeah, because if it's not anonymous, you probably want to let everybody know that it's not anonymous, right? That may influence voting, I don't know, but it's just good to know or put it out there when it's anonymous and when it's not, because people have some prejudgment about voting that it's going to be anonymous. So we just need to put that up front.
Okay, yeah, Lumio does support anonymous. It makes a distinction between what? Well, I'll have to look into it. Never mind. But there is blind voting of some sort there. I have to look into it.
Ed, I guess going forward, for some of these specific things, the platform-specific stuff and all that, did you want to? I guess your availability is only during Saturday, or how do we work together if we have ideas or whatever we want to test or kind of go back and forth with you type of?
Yeah, we could form a identity channel on Discord, which, if we don't have one already, we used to have one actually on the old Slack, I think. But yeah, we could create an identity channel and talk around that, because there'll be other folks involved as well. This is a really important topic for me. I'm available this coming week to have another meeting during the weekday too. And then, you know, we'll get Chris invited to next Saturday morning, assuming he can. It's morning time in Seattle, assuming he's available. But I'm happy to talk about the identity related requirements on the platform itself, and the ones that came to mind, I think are my list. It's not a very long list, but you know, so what would be helpful to me is if any of you could send great pointers to account abstraction and what's already in Byzantium and what's planned for what's the next one called again, Metropolis. That would be helpful.
All right, sounds good. Anything else on your mind or plate in terms of how you would want to use this group to further issues?
It'd be great to understand all of your backgrounds. I'm just meeting some of you for the first time, so it may depend on that. You know, what I'm looking for in the holdings work group is folks that are really focused on identity as, you know, part of their business, that we, you know, wouldn't have to sort of educate constantly on, you know, what is a claim, attestation, verifiable claim, revocation, and, you know what I mean, how that relying party, these should just be standard terms to this membership that's on that group, and they're willing to take on homework week to week and so forth. But what we can do is occasionally give these updates out of that working group. So an introduction would be nice. I've got more time for these introductions now, if you like. That would help me answer your question over time.
Okay, Ed, I'd probably just go first. I'm actually in the Seattle area.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm into security and privacy. So when I talk about security, more around security governance from the policy, compliance regulation kind of and standard point of view, that's what I'm interested in. And then with identity, my key interest is, like Jim mentioned, pseudonymization of identity, how we can introduce privacy into it and ensure that what we do is in compliance, as we said earlier on, with the spirit of the law in terms of privacy regulations, because there's still a lot of nuances and gray areas in that space, but we're not just going to be ticking boxes, but we're just going to be looking at the spirit and ensuring that all of this is embedded into the fabric of our design from a privacy by design point of view. So that's my area, and I'm happy to do research and look into, growing this platform and seeing how things shape out.
Oh, excellent. So, in your day job or your project, are you a consumer of identity solutions or a creator of identity solutions or other?
More of a creator of identity, and identity has been, it's been a mess over time, right? Because I was even talking earlier on Friday, I was talking about identity, and people kept on mixing what identity and entity really meant.
Yeah.
Right? Some people say you just have one identity, but in real sense, it's multiple identities. So the terminology is still a whole blur, and someone talked about roles different from identity, different from entity. All of that has to be clarified. And like I always say, we've got like multiple identity, and there has to be that broker system that gives the user the permission to decide
Correct.
what goes out, right?
Correct.
Where that is going to be placed is going to be defined. And it's really a mess to some extent, because we already have legacy systems, so we're not starting from the scratch.
Correct.
But my mantra will be, let's stop the bleeding while we heal the wound, right? So stop the bleeding first of all, and going forward, we have a clean slate, and then we can look back to see how can we heal the wound? How can we take legacy stuff and jump them into what's really new, right? So we can't do both at the same time.
Next, and you pronounce your name Amaka? Yeah. Okay. There's a RChain meetup this coming Wednesday night at UW. Originally it was going to be their UW blockchain club, but it's the word is getting out beyond that. So let me look for a link while the others are talking. I'll paste it if you happen to be available. It'd be nice to meet you in person. Cool.
Okay, I'll go next. I've been working with Jim White-Sculver for a couple of decades now. For the past few years, we've been working together in a group called Proven Secure Solutions, and we had a DARPA project that we worked on that is risk-based multi-factor authentication, and then increasing the number of factors and based on the risk and or the certainty that we're able to derive from the factors that are provided at a given point in time. That's one of the projects, but beyond that, we've been working with identity standards, OAuth-based glue and technologies like that to be able to work. Jim and I also did some proposals in this OpenID, free ID. How do you make sense of the multiple personas and multiple logins that you have, and be able to still pull things together without giving too much information about yourself? So the UMA, user managed authentication standard, and some of these other standards we've been working with. So that's Jim, am I forgetting anything else? But beyond that, Jim and I also have worked on quite a bit of process orchestration, process management. I mean, I know Greg's background included the BPEL and BPM and type of thing. So I had a lot of prior experience in that space, starting from when they were talking about workflow languages initially, and then the BPEL, and then the BPM, and all that type of stuff. So.
Yeah, Rao worked with me managing our distributed, decentralized object store for group communications at NJIT, starting as a research assistant, and since then we've worked on quite a number of projects together, including one of the first real-time loan authoring and delivering. Authorizing and delivering loans in real time for Sovereign Bank. He brings a lot of technology background, many years with Xerox in the text processing area. I guess that's good enough.
Yeah, a lot of both application level as well as the technology level background, the technology creation as well as the using the technology type of a background.
Awesome. And I see your handle here is it Raoub?
Yeah, Rao B.
Rao B. And so Rao is your first name?
Right.
Excellent. Thanks. Nice to meet you, Rao.
Same here.
Do you know everybody? Oh, Gurinder, can you speak?
Sure. Hi, how are you doing, Ed? Just like Rao and Jim, I've known Jim for about 35 years as well. Worked together for a number of projects, from the NJIT days to building communication platform. This is before your CompuServe and Telenet days, and now in developing a lot of online education tools. But lately, I've been mostly focused on security and largely rolling out single sign-on solutions for enterprises. Build some single sign-on solutions from scratch in the early 90s till deploying about 100,000 plus user single sign-on solutions. So my background is largely in networking and communication field, as well as financial world, and largely doing security and cloud security in the last few years. So that's basically where I come from.
That's impressive, Grinder.
Thanks.
Yeah, and Gurinder was in file management solutions and other things besides security with Deutsche Bank.
Right. So it's a lot of basically a Dropbox for enterprises and building key management solutions around it and all of those kind of fun stuff.
That's awesome. That company was called not FileServe, was it?
No, this is we rolled our own.
At Deutsche Bank.
It was Bankers Trust and then got bought out by Deutsche Bank.
Oh, okay.
One of the solutions for single sign-on, we spun it off and which got bought out by RSA. But the file systems, Dropbox solution was just basically internally developed, internally rolled out.
Cool.
Okay, do you know John Grant?
No, I don't.
Hi, Ed. My name's John Grant. I'm from Northern England. 15 years ago, I founded IT Jobs Watch. In that role, I'm a technology skills researcher. So that involves data science and also application development. So I can currently work with Go, Python, JavaScript, C#. I was recently introduced to RChain by my good friend Jim. Become a member. I had a fantastic onboarding by Ian Bloom. We had nearly a 2-hour one-to-one Zoom session, which was absolutely fantastic. I'm really intrigued by decentralized and distributed systems. I'm uneasy about the economic and political headwinds, and somehow that I see that those two fit together. So for me, I'm hoping to be able to contribute. I feel I've got a lot to offer, but I've also got a lot to learn. It's out of my comfort zone, this, but I'm up for a challenge.
I'm glad you have a sort of a balanced view of the headwinds and challenges ahead, because there's a lot of utopian ideas floating around that are I think important to balance. That there's going to be these challenges ahead.
Leah next. Yes.
So, hi, Ed. I've worked with Jim for...
You've worked with Jim for...
Looks like we lost your audio.
I can hear you, Jim.
Yeah. Plug in your microphone, Leah. Like she's having a problem. I'm surprised.
Yeah, I think the problem is with her mic.
Okay.
Leah's been around, since from the scenario days. I'm surprised.
Yeah, I remember her online handle. So that's great. Don't hear her voice very often.
Yeah, it looks like she had to disconnect. So
okay. Well, thank you all for the introduction. I look forward to more interaction going forward, and I feel bad that I haven't.
As we start employing the structures, both for the digital ledger and for Holochain, I guess what we'll want to do is we want to have the way that we use the standard, reviewed and hopefully develop a larger consent among the identity RChain providers as to how we make these extensions, and what they're how we could define them formally, so that we can have a greater function, so that when we add functionality, it's interoperable.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. And I have a question for you. I mean, probably this is better directed to Greg or Medha or somebody, but since you're here, anyway, let me ask you.
Sure, Ralph.
So Rolang, it allows you to do provably correct programs. But my question is, given that Rolang in its implementation in the RoVM, it goes through semantic translations through the Scala built compiler into Rosette, into JVM. So given that there are all those semantic translations across the layers, is the provably correct verification, is that being done at all those levels, or are they using subsets at each of those levels so that we can be confident that there will be no side effects from the implementation standpoint? Or
right. I think this is mostly a an approach that can be provably correct. And so it starts from the, the mathematics of concurrent processes with pi calculus, row calculus, and the proofs that start in the mathematical world. And so that's the basis of confidence of provably correct. But then the rest is what I would call correct by construction, where the transformation of row calculus to row lang is as direct as possible. And the translation from row lang to the row virtual machine is as direct as possible. Mistakes can still be made along that way, both at the design, at the design engineering phase and so forth. And so it's only through the very careful inspection and testing of that it can be proven as being correct, right? And just like there could be mistakes in the Java virtual machine and the Scala to Java pipeline and so forth. And of course, there can be bugs in any software at the user level as well. So the point is that that these things were not created based on intuition and sort of just with eyeballs of seeing that looks correct. It's by reducing the number of translation steps along the way. Does that help?
It does. I mean, right. So unless you are really using a quote-unquote safe subset at each of those levels, in addition to all the verification and validation testing you could do, there is scope for the correctness to break down or security holes to be there or something like that. But
yeah, there's definitely risks of bugs along the way and security vulnerabilities and those kinds of things. And at the end of the day, we're trusting on the intelligence of the team to not make those mistakes, for there to also be security audits, things like bug bounties, but and validation that those things are correct. And so those provable validation will take some time, frankly, I think. Now, Nash and Greg may have a slightly different spin on that, but there can be bug in any software, and the approach of correct by construction just reduces the number of things that each step requires of the considerations, so that it's more focused. John, you want to say something?
This is a question which is kind of bringing in my day job, but I'm actually genuinely interested in this, and it's not the right thing to say to the boss. But at the moment, I've had more experience with Holochain. I'm dying to start playing with Rolang and RChain, understand that more. But what I've discovered so far about the current batch of decentralized platforms, I think that's the right word, is they are quite academic. And I understand that because they're currently low level. You've got to get that right first. You've got to get the proof right, as you've just described. But what I thought I'd ask you today, just as some insight, is where do you see opportunities for abstraction to start building on top of these low-level platforms, so they could become more productive as an application development platform?
Oh, right. Well, got it. So that's a really big topic. I think the way Mercury's going to, launch is with Rolang, with IDE integration coming either out of the platform or something that Pyrofex or Holdings or others would create soon after or at the same time. So better and better development environments will make it easier. Rolang is going to be a challenge for many developers to learn at first, especially those that are, from the procedural and JavaScript kind of world or Python kind of world, because of its concurrency and stronger types and behavioral typing and so forth. So it's going to be a challenge. But not everyone needs, in the world of application creating is going to need to program in Rolang. There's going to be APIs and abstractions to make it more convenient for others. That'll take some time to build out. In addition, there certainly can be other kinds of variants of language that are more sugared, meaning sort of friendlier syntax that makes it less dense. You know, from my perspective, I dabble in programming, but I'm not a programmer. But the very dense, compact nature of both row calculus and Rolang, I find challenging because it's a lot of symbol overload in my mind. And I think some developers will also encounter, so the sugaring of the syntax, you know, more curly brackets and parentheses and more lines to make it a bit more explicit. While it doesn't really change the semantics, it makes it maybe more cognitively friendly to some people. So, and there can be completely other languages that come out that are just that all compile down to the row VM. So all this, I think, will happen in time, and it'll just take a bit of time.
I think the idea that, you know, they're developing a lot of little components that are correct, you know, that we can put together in a correct, by construction sort of manner that sort of frees the application developer from low level, you know, from there'll be building blocks for them to hang their specific functions onto that have been written in Rolang already. It, you know, will help programmers use it. And the idea that it's formal mathematics means that a validator doesn't have to use any particular architecture in order to validate the correctness that the program was run correctly. And you
no, that's not true. You know, the platform, if I understood your point, I mean, the platform itself will validate the transactions, the messages coming into a virtual machine, and, you know, they will all verify that it transitions from, you know, its previous state to the next state and is essentially serialized in the same way across many platforms. That's what Casper does. And so yeah, just like you could have completely different implementations of Ethereum, right? The Go language implementation of Ethereum and others, and achieve the same result. I have a very hard time imagining that on RChain for a while.
The difference is that RChain, you know, there's a formal mathematical definition which doesn't really exist in Ethereum or other platforms. You can't say, okay, I can prove that RChain made an error in the mathematics. Okay.
Yeah, because this is at the VM level now, right?
Yeah. Right. I mean, you know, anything that gets put on the chain, okay, is the result of a formal mathematical expression. So it's up for the scrutiny of anyone. I'm not saying I'm going to use some other tool like MATLAB or something to check the process calculus to make sure that there was no mistake made by RChain. Okay, there was no bug introduced by some layer.
Right. But what you're checking by that time at on the blockchain is whether the row VM ran its virtual machine to the next state in the correct way. That's several steps removed from the mathematics of Rolang. So, you know, that's just what is the software doing what the software is supposed to do. That's several steps removed from row calculus. And it's a different thing. Did the compiler do what it's supposed to do?
Correct. And I think in a situation like this, using a simulator to see what results you're getting versus what's happening in the compiler could still make sense.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Hey, I need to run. Someone's trying to get a hold of me on Discord, and I've got a call. I got to be on another call. I really enjoyed this conversation and look forward to talking next Saturday as well.
Thanks, Ed. I'll probably be looking out for the link.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me find that. I got distracted. I've got a small mind, can only do one thing at a time. So let me find that and send it before I sign off.
Okay.
And we'll ping you with anything on the things that we talked about today as far as the requirements and priorities that you have.
Yeah.
Yeah, next week I'm going to be hanging out with Jim and Patrick a bit. I'll be in Tampa, so we'll have some productive fun.
So one of the things, we'll be one of the things we'll be looking at is interim solutions to the voting that Ed was talking about. And, decision-making processes and governance as it relates to governance.
Yeah, last night I went to a meetup and there were two speakers from interesting organizations, one from Eternity and the other from UBIC. And UBIC is not far from Seattle. They're based in Vancouver, and Eternity is a European frenemy of RChain. And for both of them, I asked about their governance model, and well, maybe it was technical people, but they quickly descended into talking about voting with tokens, and I didn't come away with anything really useful. But it's interesting to see what the take on it is, especially UBIC. They're actually coming up with something that they call the governance token. And they're planning to use that as a voting token in order to define their governance. And Eternity basically said, well, we really haven't figured things out. First, we're working on the token voting because we need that in order to do any governance. So it could be that I was asking developers when I should be asking people playing other roles or something, but I was a little disappointed.
So these are, can you put the links to these two organizations, Kit, in the chat?
Sure, hang on a sec, let me find them.
So, but, so your take on that, I guess, is what, relative to RChain, it's not worthwhile worrying about token-based voting at this time or something?
Yes, that would actually be my advice. It's voting, as you all know, can become horribly complex, and I think we just need a simple voting mechanism that tracks things. If it used OAuth to interact with an existing server where we have RChain members registered, that would be great. But at this point in time, I really don't think we should get too ambitious because we're basically reinventing the same wheel that lots of other organizations are working on right now. And it's a waste of time with our limited resources at this point. It's a waste of time to really invest a lot in development of our own RChain solution. And I know that down the road, and that may not be so far, but it's still down the road, we are going to want our own RChain solution, the not invented here solution, or not invented elsewhere solution, sorry. But right now, all we need is simple voting. And the Discord thing that Ian set up with the thumbs up and thumb down. Yeah, that was clever, you know, within the limited possibilities of the Discord user interface, but it's insufficient. And I also think we need a way to vote anonymously. So that's
I have verified that Lumio does have an anonymous voting capability. Now, how do you feel about using Lumio? Have you ever used it before?
Yes, and I actually, I think we should organize a little test with us and invite Ed. So, you know, we come up with some simple question to vote on, like, you know, should we change the time of the meeting or whatever, you know, just something. And we create a little Lumio vote and we invite Ed so that he can experience it. Because what I like about Lumio is they've already done all the work and the thinking. And if we try to build something, we're going to be doing the same thinking all over again. And
so my question with Lumio, sorry to cut you, is what is the identity challenge if we want to move into the Lumio platform?
I think it's just a matter of OAuth authentication, either against Discord or the member site, so that we can, with the co-op, they have membership, they have a very strong KYC, so they everyone has a strong, unique identity. We just have to make it anonymous when it comes to voting.
So, for example, when you say everyone has a unique identity after the KYC, is that being communicated, or is just the use of the email address that they use for the identity? What's the unique ID?
Well, go ahead.
It's a private internal application that does the KYC, and it has a passport and an email address. However, that information is not shared anywhere, and that's not the intention. So only the admin of the database behind the application can actually see who is who in terms of their Discord ID. But
there's a group of verifiers who arrange a a Zoom conference with each person individually, where they hold up their ID and they check to match that matches what they submitted when they applied for membership.
Yeah, I mean, one of the concerns right now is that the security of the data, the passport data or driver license data that they're collecting is one of the things, I guess. I don't know how that can be handled, but I have a different question also.
They do have, you know, it has been security audited. You can contact the team to get information about that. I can't remember who they said to contact, but I'm sure you can ask Ian.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, who did the security audit and what their criteria was.
Now, regarding the members, I was actually puzzled, I guess this week, in different conversations, the number of members was coming out different. I thought there were 600 or 650 members or something like that, and somebody was saying 70 members. What's the reality in terms of the total member base right now?
I had the 70 numbers. I was kind of, yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Rob.
Because I thought it was closer to 700, like 650 or something. Kit, do you know how many actual signed up members?
Yeah, I don't have an exact number. The last number that I remember was 670. But those are people who have gone through the member site, done the KYC, and may or may not be in Discord. So
yeah, I think the 70 members are the people who are part of RAM, the RChain active members. Okay, they've joined GitHub, and they've and I guess they participated. I don't know. That's one of the criteria we're defining is what constitutes an active member versus a passive member.
So, my thought is, where can I go to ensure that I'm part of the 70? What's the process?
Hang on, and I'll post a link for you. Because that number that you heard now, I remember the 70, that was referring to members who are actually active, which means members who are contributing and doing stuff. And we, a long time ago, before the membership program got rolling, we invented the name activist for those people. And then later, when the membership program got going, then we stopped using activists, but now we're thinking of using it again because there are many members, some of which only want to be passive. They're just investors in RChain, and they don't even want to be on Discord. So they are a member technically, but they're not at all active. So that 70 was for the people who are actively contributing. Yeah.
So there should be a way for me to check that I'm in the pool of 70 or not, or what someone can do to get in the pool. Just that quick status updates.
I think if you just comment on any issue in GitHub, you're in, as long as you've gone through the KYC process. And that contributing.md is sort of a manual of how to get involved. Just follow that document.
Yeah, but let me emphasize, I think going through the contributing.md is an extremely important thing. Jim got me into some trouble by not emphasizing that to me, but...
Yeah, and it's important, this is made clear in contributing MD, but you're welcome to join and contribute without going through KYC. So anybody who has a GitHub account is welcome to contribute. We have to invite them to the repository if they want to be able to check things in and such. And there's a legal requirement that starts to come up, which is if you're contributing and if you want to be rewarded, then over the course of 1 year, if you make more than $600, then we need identity because of the IRS. They want to know who got that $600 or more dollars, and they want to know whether it's taxable. So I'm based in the Netherlands, so they can't tax me, but I still have to fill in a form and say, I'm exempt, this is who I am, I'm exempt. And now it's okay, but there's this $600 threshold where people have to have more than just a GitHub account, and the natural thing is to become a member and join the Discord, but that's not required.
So this 70 number, it's anybody that signed up on GitHub, or is it anybody that signed up on GitHub minus those that are not members? You know what I mean? I mean, there's an overlap there where somebody may not be a member but could still be a contributor on GitHub.
Yeah, there are very few people who are contributing and are not members.
Okay.
So
well, that number is going to increase now because now they have started this Chinese translation and all that kind of stuff, right? With a whole bunch of Lawrence is getting to increase the number of developers and all that. So I guess we need to see how that maps. But
yeah, exactly. Some of those Chinese people might be that small subset of people who are only working on GitHub. And well, it's great that they're contributing and translating. And if they get rewarded, then when it hits 600, then we're going to have to ask them for a little bit more. But in fact, it still isn't necessary to do the whole KYC. We just need you to fill out a form.
Well, yeah, the thing is, if they're not being rewarded, then there is no need for that, the KYC and all that. But
none, exactly. Yeah.
Very good. Anyways, I have to get going. Any other pressing items on this, or we're pretty much at a closing point? Or
I think it's time.
All right. I'll see you later. Thank you very much, everybody.
Bye-bye.